Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Health Made Easy. I'm your host, Dr. Jason Jones, your practical voice in a world of confusing health information. And today we are going to be continuing in our series on inflammation, and we're going to be talking about the top 7 sources of inflammation. You want to hang in there until the end because number 7 is the key one to actually avoid. They are all important, but 7 is definitely one you want to watch out for. Now, inflammation is simply... it's like our immune system's natural response, to injury and illness. And this involves, the release of inflammatory chemicals in the bloodstream to protect the body from foreign invaders like bacteria, viruses, all kinds of things. But in case of an injury, there's always this sort of localized inflammatory response that actually helps the healing process. But remember, there's 2 types of inflammation. You have acute and you have chronic. Acute helps us heal, so that you can think of it as sort of like a good inflammation, but then there's chronic inflammation, which is associated with a whole host of chronic conditions or diseases, and you can describe that as bad if you want. Now, what makes chronic inflammation harmful to our health? Well, unlike the acute form of inflammation, which is typically caused by injury or illness, chronic inflammation often happens without an injury or an illness present per se. Now, the bad part is that it lasts way longer than it should. In fact, the condition is a major contributing factor in many diseases associated with getting older. Over time, chronic inflammation can cause major changes in the body's cells, tissues, organs, and systems, and over time this progresses to DNA damage and tissue death. Although scientists do not always understand and do not always know where chronic inflammation actually comes from, this condition is certainly one of several contributing factors in diseases in terms of their onset and also their progression. So far, chronic inflammation has a strong link with heart disease and type 2 diabetes, but there's also other conditions as well. Things like high blood pressure, kidney disease, high cholesterol, depression, various types of cancer, osteoporosis, autoimmune conditions, fatty liver disease, and neurodegenerative disorders, or basically degeneration of not only the brain, but different parts of your nervous system like your spinal cord and the coverings around your nerves and things like that. Now, chronic inflammation is quite dangerous because it often is very progressive, and it happens really quietly with only a few independent symptoms oftentimes. And despite the subtle nature of the condition, it represents a major threat to our health and longevity as a whole. So you may be wondering, what are the sources, of chronic inflammation? So let's talk about it. All right, there's several kinds of scientific studies that have been done to identify different causes of chronic systemic inflammation, many of which are associated with our lifestyle and aging. And if you remember, Cleveland Clinic even said 90% of all health problems are lifestyle and environment. So, number 1, I'm going to do these real fast because there's not enough time in this podcast to keep it to go into deep detail on these. But number 1, diet. Foods that are high in refined sugar, trans fats, saturated fats, the bad kind of saturated fats, there is a good kind of that, are largely linked with increased inflammation, especially the more overweight you are. And unfortunately, that is a factor that we're going to talk about in a minute. Now, physical inactivity. Now, when your muscles and your body are in constant motion, it actually supports anti-inflammatory chemical processes in your bloodstream. But unfortunately, many people don't even meet the minimum activity recommendations for health. And this causes an increased risk of age-related diseases, but also an increased risk of them just being inflamed all the time. Obesity is a huge factor. When you have too much visceral fat, and even subcutaneous fat, around your organs, underneath the skin, it triggers the production of pro-inflammatory chemicals. So if you just think about it this way, as obesity goes up, so does inflammation. Okay, having low sex hormones. So when you have lower levels of sex hormones like testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, especially as you age, it increases your risk of suffering from inflammatory diseases. Sleep disorders. Chronic inflammation can be triggered when you have irregular sleep patterns or irregular sleep schedules. So on the other hand, if you get the regular amount of sleep, it lowers those inflammatory markers. Age. Now, as you grow older, you stand at more of a risk of suffering from chronic inflammation. I believe that's not because of age, but because of the accumulative effects of all of these other ones. They add up, and the longer you're on this planet, the more chance you have of actually having these things come around. So I get so tired of people blaming age for everything. It's ridiculous, because I can tell you that there are people who are older than you are, maybe even a decade older than you are, that are in better shape, better health than you are, and there are people who are a decade younger than you are, who are in worse shape and have worse health than you do. So you cannot blame it on age. Now, number 7 is smoking. Smoking cigarettes. Listen, I shouldn't even have to explain it. You know what I mean? It's just like at this point, if you're smoking, no judgment or anything like that, and I understand it's very difficult to quit, but the data is so crystal clear that it just accelerates every single negative health parameter out there. But smoking cigarettes have been studied to lower the levels of anti-inflammatory markers and increase the risk of chronic inflammation. No shock there. So those are your 7 common sources. There are more, okay? And again, these are just there for you to evaluate your own personal situation and start to take action, okay? Because thinking about these things won't change a darn thing. You have to take action. You have to get your rear end in gear in the areas where you need to make changes, okay? So you don't have to like it, you don't have to believe it, you don't have to be motivated, you don't need any of that nonsense. What you need is to get going and just get active doing the things that you're supposed to do to lower inflammation, and your health will be better for it. I promise you. You just need enough time and enough repetition doing the right things, and your life will change. Hey, this is Dr. Jason Jones. I hope you love this podcast. If you did, go over to our Facebook page, go to our website, go to wherever you listen to this on a podcast player. Give us some feedback by doing a review. We appreciate it, and we'll see you on the next podcast. Bye-bye.